Hello, my name is Zach Morin, and I have been interning here at RPG Corporation over the last 8 weeks and would like to present my findings. First, we will discuss today an overview of the network that was already been in place in Milestone 1. Second, we will discuss changes that we made to the network and things that we learned along the way. Next, we will go over what was learned and implemented to our second environment in Milestone 2. And finally, we'll finish up by opening the floor for questions. Let's get started. So, Milestone 1 Network Overview. Here we have a generic image of what the network in place looks like. We have 3 networks initially, Site 1, Site 2, and our DMZ. We have 4 servers in total and 2 client PCs, one a Windows workstation and one a Linux workstation. This creates the foundation for our environment, each LAN representing its own network. And we had an IP address scheme that we created for this assignment. Site 1 uses network 192.168.1.x. Site 2 uses 192.168.2.x. And the DMZ is set up in 192.168.3.x. Some of the following requests were given by RPG Corporation, and that's what we'll talk about on this slide. First, we were asked to create 2 domain controllers, one on each site. We were asked to create security groups inside Active Directory with 2 users in each group alongside an appropriate ADOU structure. Next, we created drive mappings for users to a home drive, as well as drive mappings for departments to a shared drive for each department. Finally, one of the final things we did was create GPOs configuring Windows Update and Windows Firewall, as well as creating firewall GPOs to allow traffic from the DMZ to either enter Site 1 or Site 2 when initiated by Site 1 or Site 2. Creating the domain controllers. First, I started with the domain controllers. I achieved this by creating a domain on Site 1 named rpg.corp.com and promoted that server to a domain controller. I followed that by adding the server 2 to the domain and then promoting that Site 2 to a domain controller. Next, I worked in creating security groups in Active Directory, creating different security groups for each department as shown in this image in this slide. Each security group is shown with 2 users that were created. The ADOU structure was reconstructed a bit from its originality in the files. I added the groups folder to house the separate groups while creating a separate OU named active users to house our new users. I also created the workstations OU to house what was originally in the computer file, so it would have more continuity moving forward if more workstations were added in the future. I followed that up by working on creating drive mappings for all the users to a home drive, as well as creating a shared drive mapping for users to a department drive. I created each map drive for each individual user in each department, as well as creating a file share for each user and department. Next, I configured GPOs for Windows Firewall and Windows Update. Windows Firewall and Windows Update, this was done by opening Group Policy Manager and configuring a GPO that would start automatic updates. It was then edited and created to restart at a scheduled time, 3 a.m. to be exact, to check for updates. We then created a GPO pushing Windows Firewall to all the machines on the server. This was probably one of the more challenging parts of my experience through this internship, but it was one of the most rewarding at the same time. One of the final things we worked on was allocating network traffic between the DMZ and Site 1 and Site 2. We did this by first creating a firewall rule to allow traffic from the DMZ on Site 1 or Site 2 when it was initiated by Site 1 or Site 2. We then created a firewall rule in the DMZ to block traffic on Site 1 and Site 2. This is shown that through this photo, we had an inability to connect from the DMZ to Site 1 or Site 2 while still having connectivity connecting from Site 1 to the DMZ. In our next set of slides, we'll talk about the Milestone 2 objectives overview. We did this creating a live environment involving 2 routers, 2 switches, 1 Windows workstation, and 1 Linux machine. We then configured RAID 1 storage configuration on our HP server. We then deployed Windows Server 2016 onto the server. Shown in this IP configuration, we can see that we have an IP address for all of the moving parts within the network for switch 1, each router, each serial interface. I used a serial cable to connect the 2 routers on each end of the networks. This would mean that there were 3 networks in total to be accounted for. Each interface had its own IP address, as shown on the image on the slide. After establishing an IP address for each interface, each switch needed to be configured to a default gateway. Finally, and the trickiest part of the portion of this milestone, was figuring out how the routers would talk to each other across the networks. This was done by using the IP route command, established from both routers. We then added a Linux machine to the environment, configuring a static IP address for that machine, and then added that to the network. All IP addresses and the Linux machine were able to ping across the network completely. To finish the milestone work in Milestone 2, it was requested to configure RAID 1 storage on a server with 2 removable drives. First, the drives and the servers had to be wiped clean and fresh for a new start. Second, we used HP Smart Start as a basis for creating the RAID 1 configuration. The DVD was inserted into the server, and once booted up in the BIOS, it was able to configure to have RAID 1 storage configuration. This was followed by our Windows deployment of 2000 Server 16. We did this by entering the Windows Server 2016 disk and configuring the setup accordingly. Conclusion and open to panel questions. In closing, I would like to say that this was one of the more challenging but rewarding IT experiences that I've had personally so far in my journey to become an IT tech. The challenges were there to push me to my limits on what I thought I knew and also help me develop solid strategies for the future. This was an excellent experience, and I am thankful to the RPG Corperation team for extending this offer to work on their network. At this time, I would like to open the floor to the panel for any questions that you may have. Thank you.